Welcome to week 4 of the Transition to Organic webinar series for crop producers. We have two fabulous speakers who will be discussing allowed inputs and materials and biodiversity conservation. This series is a collaboration between the Community Alliance of Family Farmers, UC Cooperative Extension, and the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. I'm Grace Jackson, the Farmer Services Central Valley Regional Lead at CAFF. Margaret Lloyd, UCCE Farm Advisor for Organic Agriculture and Small Farms, will join us in the coming weeks, and I'll pass it over to Katharina Ullman to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katharina Ullman. I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator with the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. It's so wonderful to see so many farmers on the call today. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today and for your interest in organic agriculture. We have such an exciting session today, and I'm really looking forward to learning with you all. I'll pass it back to you, Grace.
Thanks, Katharina. A quick note to thank our funders, the CDFA Office of Agricultural Resilience and Sustainability, CDFA's State Organic Program, and the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Few important reminders, this webinar will be available to watch on the UC OAI and CAFF YouTube channels after the webinar series, and you'll receive an email with presentation slides and resources every week after the webinar. We have a brief overview of today's structure. We will get started with presentation 1 momentarily. Presentation 2 by our second speaker will begin for about 25 minutes after that. We'll save 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, wrap things up formally with a closing poll at 1:15, and then we invite all of you to stay on for office hours from 1:15 to 2, where our presenters will continue answering questions that have come through the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask during that time, you can. The webinar series comes with a resource guide, which you're able to access links from each session, PowerPoints, the presentation slides, resources, and optional OSP homework if you want to pace yourself through this series and try to complete your OSP. I'm going to hand it over to Katharina to introduce our speakers for today.
Thanks so much, Grace. And yes, super excited to be in week 4 of this 10-week webinar series on transition to organic for crop producers in California. Today, we're going to be hearing about allowed inputs and biodiversity conservation on farms. We have two fantastic speakers, as Grace said. We're going to hear from each of them and then have some time for Q&A. As always, please put your questions in the chat box. But I am really excited to be able to introduce these two experts in their fields. So first, we're going to be hearing from Jamie Collins. Jamie is CCOF Foundation's office hours host and owner of Serendipity Farm. She has been farming organically for 25 years and has worked as an organic inspector, mentor, and marketing consultant with the CCOF Foundation just as long. Joanne Baumgartner is our second presenter. Joanne is the Executive Director of Wild Farm Alliance, which works at the intersection of biodiversity conservation and agriculture. Before joining Wild Farm Alliance in 2001, she was an organic farmer for over a decade. So happy to have them here. We're going to start with Jamie Collins. Grace will be sharing her screen, and we'll pass it over to Grace and Jamie. And Grace, I'll let you know when we can see your screen. Great. We can see that screen, Grace. And Jamie, over to you.
All right, great. Good afternoon. Today we're going to cover how to know if a product is allowed in organic production. This includes pest controls, fertilizers, soil amendments, compost, seedling and potting mix, seed treatments, and purchase transplants. Organic certification is not based on good intentions, it's based on proof. Inspectors look at what products you used and whether they were allowed. If a prohibited product is used, the crop will not be able to be sold as organic. That is why we want to verify products before using them. Next slide. Why does input compliance matter? Because non-compliant products can jeopardize certification and set the clock back on your transition time or decertify an organic operation. Documentation is required for annual audits, so it's good practice to maintain records like labels for products, purchase records, receipts, documentations of use of your various products. It's important to do your research before applying anything, even if your fertilizer salesperson says it's fine. Oftentimes they're wrong. Don't take the risk of trusting someone. Locate the proof that the product you want to use is compliant with the organic standards. I would suggest also applying for certification a year before you're eligible if possible, so that you have time to complete the paperwork, have the inspection, and address any issues before your organic date rolls around. Next slide. The national list is a federal list of substances that are allowed or prohibited in organic production. Some natural products are prohibited and some synthetic products are allowed with restrictions. We don't expect farmers to memorize the list. Instead, we use trusted product review systems to help us follow it. Next slide. OMRI is one of those lists. OMRI stands for the Organic Materials Review Institute. It's an independent organization that reviews products for organic compliance. You can search for a product you want to use there or locate products that are approved that you might be interested in using. Next slide. The WSDA is a resource you can use to find if a product is approved for organic use as well. Some companies may have the WSDA review their product label instead of OMRI, so this is another resource to use when researching if a product is compliant. It's a good rule of thumb to search both sites as well as the national list. Next slide. Here are some examples of commonly allowed inputs. They include compost and manure that meet organic handling rules. If you're making your own compost, be sure to educate yourself on the requirements for temperature, turning, and the inclusion of manure in order to be in compliance for both organic certification and food safety. If you are planning to make your own compost, you will need to disclose all ingredients and the methods you use to make sure it is properly managed to be in compliance, especially if manure is being used. There are regulations on when manure can be used on a crop depending on how many days until harvest the manure is applied and if the crop touches the ground. So while compost and manure can be allowed, there are still restrictions on how the compost is made and when the manure is applied in order to be in compliance. Biological pest controls like BT or beneficial insects are good methods to try before resorting to an organic approved pesticide. BT products still need to be verified. Also, planting beneficial hedgerows encourages good bugs to move in and help manage pests. Or planting beneficial flowers like alyssum between the crop rows can also be very helpful. Next slide. So commonly prohibited inputs are typically synthetic fertilizers, most conventional herbicides and pesticides, sewage sludge, and GMO products are also prohibited. If a product is commonly used in conventional farming, assume it is not allowed unless you verify otherwise. Treated lumber is not allowed unless it is grandfathered in and was installed prior to your management. Leaking tractors, leaking porta potties, or material nearby an organic field can also decertify a field potentially. A good practice is to look around your field and just see if there's anything that could be a contaminant. Next slide. All materials fall into 3 categories: allowed, restricted, and prohibited. Every product that has been reviewed by OMRI has a certificate that looks like this. You can easily search on the website. Not all products that are approved for organic use are on the OMRI list because the company has to pay to have their ingredients reviewed. A good rule of thumb is to check the 3 that review products for organic compliance listed here: Washington State Department of Ag, WSDA, CDFA, so that's California Department of Food and Ag, and OMRI. They audit and approve the products for manufacturers. This is OMRI certificate for a material. In this case, it's a restricted micronutrient. Notice how it states there must be a documented deficiency in order to use the product. CCOF has an internal list of products they have reviewed. The link is also on this slide. If you are in the process of certification with CCOF and you want to use a product that you think is in compliance with organic standards but not found on these 3 lists, you can request a product be reviewed. Next slide. Oftentimes, a product appears to be in compliance for organic farms to use. However, it is often the inert ingredients that disqualify the product. Often the inert ingredients used to make the product are proprietary and not listed on the label. This is why an independent reviewer like OMRI is used to review all of the ingredients, including the inert ingredients that may be used to help the solution flow or stick, for example, without the company having to disclose the proprietary ingredients. CCOF asks that the product be requested to be added to your operation before using, which protects the grower or handler from their operation being decertified due to using a prohibited material. Look for the OMRI or WSDA logo on the label. If there is not a listing, you must look the product up or ask the manufacturer for documentation and check with your certifier before using it. And don't rely on words like natural, eco, organic based. These are marketing ploys or terms that may not be compliant for organic farms. Next slide. Now we're going to discuss micronutrients. So many soils do need supplemental micronutrients. However, applying them is restricted. This is because micronutrients can be synthetic and have the potential to contaminate crops, soil, or water, meaning you must try other methods prior to application. The take home is: 1, all materials need to be approved prior to application. 2, for micronutrients, a deficiency needs to be shown. But some of the materials are tricky. Copper, for instance, it's sometimes used as a micronutrient, but more often used as a fungicide in orchard operation. It's toxic to insects, especially pollinators. It also has restrictions on how much can be applied per acre per year. So be sure to be clear about your micronutrient use. On the right side of the screen, there's some generic examples of inputs: macro, micro, pest control, and sanitizers. All materials fall into 3 categories. They're either approved, restricted, or prohibited, no matter what scope, whether it's grower, handler, or livestock. Micronutrients and pest control fall into this category, meaning other measures need to be established prior to application. For example, showing a deficiency or that all other methods of control have failed, for pest, for example, before its use can be justified. Next slide. So this is an example of a soil sample that would need to be shown to your certifier or to your inspector to justify a micronutrient deficiency before you could use it. Next slide. All approved pest control materials fall into the restricted category, no matter what. Here are some examples of the various types of controls to try before using a restricted pest control. Similar to micronutrients, the grower needs to show that these other methods have not worked prior to applying pest control materials. Hopefully these methods are in practice, and then if aphids or mites explode with growth, no other methods are going to eliminate the pest pressure. So perhaps in that example, the farmer sprays pyganic, for example, and then once they're under control, they release lacewings. Next slide. This is a form in the grower organic system plan, specifically pest management and preventative practices. The grid is a list of potential practices a grower may use before applying pest control materials. Some examples are growing habitat or insectaries for beneficial bugs, like natives or alyssums, or really anything blooming. Releasing predatory bugs like lacewings or ladybugs. Installing owl boxes or predatory bird perches to combat gophers. Rotating crops will break weed and pest cycles. Many options, but still often a grower will need to apply an insecticide, then maybe release lacewings to keep an outbreak from occurring again. Next slide. Now we're going to discuss seeds, plants, potting mix, and rootstocks or transplants. All seeds must be untreated, or the seed treatment must also be organic approved. This includes inoculants for cover crops, peas, etc., as well as pelletized seed for ease of planting. Purchased transplants must be grown organically, and you must maintain the certificate for the company you purchased the plants from. Potting mix for growing seedlings or for container growing must also be approved for organic use. Always check to make sure these products are compliant before using, and add them as a material to your certifier's organic system plan. Next slide. So when in doubt, if a product can be used for organic certification for your organic operation, ask your certifier before using it. Request product documentation, and never assume a product is allowed. Next slide. Here is a list of some resources for farmers to be able to use to figure out whether a product you want to use is compliant. And also a couple links about how to protect birds from Wild Farm Alliance that you'll hear from next, and also how even organic pesticides can hurt beneficial insects on the last link there. Next slide. So the final takeaways that I'd like to make sure that you understand is verify all the products before you apply them. Keep really good records, receipts, the product information sheets, use trusted resources, and also just remember the organic compliance protects your organic certification. So it's very important that you follow these processes. Next slide. And that's about it for me. But if you need help with organic certification process, please note this Zoom link. I'm available every Tuesday at 11 a.m. for organic office hours. I can answer any questions as well as consult about the process of certification or help you figure out what inputs are approved. And I can also be emailed at the email listed on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing all of that information. I know people have questions, some of which are in the chat box. We'll get to those questions during the Q&A portion of this webinar, but if additional questions come up, please put them in the chat box. For now, we're going to switch gears and start thinking a little bit about biodiversity conservation and natural resources on farms. So Joanne, why don't you go ahead and share your screen? I'll let you know that we can see it.
Okay. How's that look?
Great. That looks great. Thank you so much, Joanne. So I'll pass it over to Joanne Baumgartner now with the Wild Farm Alliance.
Thanks, Katharina. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm the executive director of Wild Farm Alliance. We promote healthy, vibrant agriculture that protects and restores wild nature. Biodiversity supports farm productivity and resilience, and it's required by the organic standards. How you incorporate biodiversity depends, but in any case, it can be flexible and farm specific. Today, I'm going to talk about Wild Farm Alliance and the biodiversity crisis, the NOP's Natural Resource and Biodiversity Conservation Guidance, what beneficial insects and birds need, the biodiversity continuum, positive indicators and red flags, and some of our resources. And I hope I don't talk too fast. I'm trying to make myself slow down. We have this awesome 2050 vision where we want to see 1 million nest boxes and perches on farms in the US, hedgerows to the moon and back, which means 500,000 miles of hedgerows, which is what the UK used to have before industrial ag. And we want to see 100,000 miles of riparian habitat be restored, which is about 10% of US farms. So what do? We help farmers and others understand how biodiversity can help support functions on the farm and also support the bigger picture of how our world functions. We've educated around 1,700 people at 24 events. We have I gotta slow down. We have nesting structures and perches mapped, about 1,200 right now. Last year, we helped 10 farms put in habitat and make plans. We published 6 resources. We've had 62,000 views of our videos. You really need to check out them. They are all applicable to organic growers, and we're growing. We have lots of followers. So I want to start out talking about insects and how they're at the basis of our biodiversity food security and how all these other organisms and functions rely on insects. But there's a global decline of insects for lots of different factors, but agriculture intensification and pesticides and fertilizers are a big reason for that decline. So that doesn't mean just, pest insects. That means the beneficials that help regulate the pests. And birds are in decline. There's 3 billion less birds today than in the 1970s, and they eat insects, so that's part of their reason. This is a kind of a shocking statistic if you haven't seen it before. Of all the mammals on Earth, 96% are livestock and humans, and only 4% are wild animals. So those things are kind of, upsetting, but the good news is that when you do something good for biodiversity and farmers across the country manage 60% of the landscape, you're going to feel good that you're helping turn that decline around and help us support these organisms that are so important to our farms and to our world. So specifically, the National Organic Program has guidance that was written in 2016. It's reflecting on these words in yellow that were written with when the rule first came out in the early 2000s. And that is maintain or improve natural resources, including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. Biodiversity is part of the definition of organic production. And the preamble to the regulation says that producers must initiate practices to conserve biodiversity and show it in their OSP. So for years before the guidance came out, certifiers and farmers were like, well, we just have to protect soil and water. But the NOP said, no, it's more than that. You must protect the biodiversity, and it has to be maintained and or improved. So they want to see comprehensively that biodiversity is conserved. And it's all the resources, not just some of them. It's soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. So what is biodiversity on the farms? Well, we wrote this publication around 2016 too. It's still really relevant. You can download all of the publications I'm going to be talking about from our website at wildfarmalliance.org. It's all free. So biodiversity is the soil, plant, and animal life on the farm. It's crop areas, and it's non-crop areas like the annual flower strips or perennial native plant hedgerows. It's livestock and wildlife, like the beneficial insects and birds and bats and pollinators and other organisms that live on your farm. And it's the ecological processes that support production. So the NOP gives some more examples, like conserving biodiversity could include protecting riparian areas, supporting native species and habitats, and minimizing invasive species. The NOP wants plans or says you can, if you have a conservation plan, like say you worked with USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, on a transition plan that would include it would automatically include some piece of conservation that can be attached to your OSP. And or if you were to work with us or another organization that help you with conservation, you can attach that. And or you just keep records of what you're doing. Activity logs for mowing, for monitoring beneficials and pests, for reseeding, and so forth. And the guidance has a couple of interesting, important parts that says if you own land or if you have a farm with no biodiversity, but right next door on land that you don't own, but that you manage for biodiversity, and it directly benefits your organic land, then you can count that. They also have exceptions for extreme climatic conditions or damage to the ecosystem beyond the control of the operation. But biodiversity does pay off with natural pest control, pollination, healthier soils and water, and greater resilience to extremes that are coming at us with climate change. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about, you want to support some beneficials because you're going to get benefits from them, and you need to know or need to think about what they need. And it's similar to what we need in the bigger sense. Like we need a place to sleep, we need a place to cook and eat, and a place to hang out, and a place to wash, and insects need a lot of these things, and birds. They need shelter, nectar. These are insects, shelter, nectar, alternative hosts, prey, and energy sources, and pollen. And this is the acronym SNAP. And this is, if you have all these things, insects are going to be coming to your farm. beneficial insects. This graphic here, we're going to break this down, but in general, over here on the left could be like a hedgerow where you'd have some generalist predators living and maybe some specific ones too. Sometimes like like an oak tree can support certain kinds of lots of caterpillars actually that are important for important food source when the crop's pest isn't there. The beneficials still have to eat something. You might want to plant corn because it provides pollen for predatory mites. Plant a strip of alyssum, which supports syrphid flies, and those syrphid flies are really important for organic lettuce, but lots of other pests too. You could put in cover crops or grass cover under an orchard to support hunting spiders or web building spiders and others. So beneficial birds need kind of similar things. They're kind of different. They need shelter. They need a place to nest and roost. They need water. They need a steady source of nutrition, and they need space. They need territory. With birds, birds some birds live low, like on the ground or under little shrubs. Some of them live in riparian zones. Some of them are mid canopy, and some of them are high in the canopy. And how they forage and what they eat depends on where they're hanging out. So, hedgerows, native plant hedgerows, we help growers put in these plantings. They support lots of different kinds of beneficials, including syrphid flies, lacewings, lady beetles, predatory mites. They also support birds that can help reduce pests in crops that are growing nearby. You don't have to put in a long hedgerow. You could just have little habitat patches where there's providing shelter sites and web attachment sites and microchromatic features for spiders. Habitat patches could also be where they support a caterpillar, that alternate prey, that then this parasitoid wasp would attack and be there for you when it wants to then go into your crop field and attack pests. You could also plant a row of sunflowers. This study was in organic vegetables in Florida, where the birds that like to perch would come in and then go down into the organic vegetables and help reduce some of the pests. Alternative prey can be supported by plants that aren't growing in your farm for cash. For instance, if you're not growing corn or any kind of grass plant that to make money, you could plant corn stalks that then would bring in this cereal aphid that is not going to move into your crop, but is going to support these lady beetles, and birds would go crazy over something like this too. Alternative hosts, I mentioned the oak trees supports tons of caterpillars, and like I want to say different oak trees support over 100 species of caterpillars here, more over on the East Coast, and then tachinid flies, for instance, will attack this oak caterpillar, and tachinid flies are really important predator. Supporting riparian habitat, we know, means that there's going to be a lot of parasitoid richness, different species in riparian zones that then move out into the crop vegetation. As Jamie mentioned, sometimes just planting something simple because you're leasing your grounds or you don't want to put in a perennial planting right away, you can put in alyssum strips and or plugs in between, and it supports this this syrphid fly. Cover crops I mentioned, and how when they're flowering, they're supporting lots of beneficials and also birds. The crops themselves can support biodiversity. You want to make sure that you don't dissuade them. Like these chickadees will eat the overwintering codling moth in apple orchards and walnut orchards. Planting corn, I mentioned, but you can also plant sunflowers. Both kinds of plants provide lots of pollen for predatory mites. That when you have that, you extend their longevity and their egg-laying ability. Some plants, this is really cool if you've never seen this before. Some plants have extra floral nectaries. They provide nectar for, it's got to be for the beneficials that are helping keep them healthy. And so, for instance, elderberry plants, we love to help growers put in elderberry, and they have these extra floral nectaries that then support beneficials when they need that extra food source. Minute pirate bugs are general predators, and they have a really unique need in that they lay their eggs in really soft bodied tissue. So having some of those kinds of plants around are important. You can learn about all this about beneficial insects and the predator and parasitoid habitat that supports them in this booklet. Here's our website, or you can take a picture of this QR code. And in the back, it lists 50 plants that will support the different beneficials, and it tells you which pests that they eat. And excuse me. And for instance, this annual buckwheat has extra floral nectaries and will support minute pirate bug. Yeah. So now I want to move into avian pest control. I studied birds eating codling moth in apple orchards. Researchers all around the world have studied avian pest control and these different crops. And a few years ago, we published this document, Supporting Beneficial Birds and Managing Pest Birds. And in it, we looked at over 120 studies that were about avian pest control, and 90% of the time they showed that birds were helpful at reducing ag pests. We've known this for a long time. People have been researching how important birds are since the 1800s and documenting it since the 1800s. So how do you support birds? The thing about birds is they eat a lot of insects when they're raising their kids. So you can put in nest boxes, or you can put in vegetated habitat. And it's interesting to know that smaller birds like chickadees and titmice don't move very far. So they're, if you have a nest box in your farm, they're probably going to stay right there on your farm if you have enough for them to eat. And chickadees, they feed their nestlings about 150 times a day, bluebirds about 170 times a day. So how could that be possible? Well, there's parents, right? There's two of them. They're feeding every 5 minutes, and they're feeding during the longest part of the year, like 15 hours in a day for about 20 days. So that's 3,400 insects, which is a lot of insects. And that's actually a really low number. Yesterday, we had a webinar about tree swallows and heard that it's like 3 times as much for tree swallows. So as I mentioned, plants can support many caterpillars, and those caterpillars are important for birds, not just for beneficial insects. Some plants provide nectar for birds. And we published this document, Beneficial Bird Native Plant Chart, the California one. We have one for the Midwest too, where it lists 160 different plants and which plants support what plant characteristics support birds. Like this, these different colors of blue mean that the dark blue of the caterpillar means all these plants support a lot of caterpillars. And this data over here is supporting or telling us that birds just hang out, roost in these plants more or less, or they are eating the seeds or fruit from them, nuts from them, and or nesting. And birds need cover. They need to, when they're tired, they need a place to hang out. They need to be out of the elements. They need to be protected or have protection from predators. Birds also need water. They need it for drinking and bathing, and some birds like barn swallows or cliff swallows use mud to build their nests. Even if you just leave a little bit of water dripping, that can help birds significantly. If you have, bigger water features, that's great. Another publication we put out was nesting structures for beneficial birds. There's one for California and there's one for the Midwest. And it tells you birds are so fascinating, and putting up nest boxes is really a simple thing to do. It's really cheap. You don't have to water it like with plants. You can put up barn owl nest boxes, not just songbird nest boxes. Matt Johnson here at Humboldt State and his students determined that a barn owl family eats about 3,500 rodents every year. They've done tons of studies on barn owls, but I thought you'd be interested in this one, where they compared what's the cost of using nest boxes versus lethal trapping. And they said a nest boxes per acre per year was somewhere around $6 to $26 for gophers, voles, and mice, whereas lethal trapping is a lot more, $72 all the way up to $500, depending on the species. So why wouldn't you put up barn owl boxes? There is a caveat. If your rodent population is really out of control, the barn owls they are not that effective. But if they're pretty much at a low density, they'll help you keep them low. If you put up nest boxes or perches, you could join our Farmland Flyways Trail just by filling out a survey, putting in some photos, and there's a picture of Javier Zamora and how he put up some nest boxes. We have this really cool tool. It's still in development, but I wanted to share it with you. The URL is wildfarmalliance.org/explorer. And what you can do is choose a pest. It'll tell you which birds eat the pest. And for instance, this oak titmouse came up. It'll tell you which plants to plant to support the oak titmouse. And then it'll tell you all the other things that it also eats. None of the data is wrong that's up, but we're still adding a bunch to it. But if you want to check it out, it's part of a bigger project that'll be done in a year or so. I would be remiss if I didn't mention pesticides harm birds and how to reduce the risk. We published this document, Protecting Birds in Ag Landscapes, and it has a list of the organic pesticides that are problematic. So what happens to birds? Well, they can get poisoned directly from residues. They could get poisoned from eating treated seeds, which probably isn't going to happen actually with organic. They can get sublethal effects from the poisons that mess with their navigation, with their feeding and reproduction. They also, pesticides reduce the food for birds. They eat a lot of insects. So when researchers, all those studies, those avian pest control research studies, a lot of them are conducted on organic farms because there's nothing there for them they don't show up on conventional farms. So what do? You want to choose the least toxic pesticide and avoid, if you're using pesticides, avoid using them around nesting birds and when they're feeding their chicks. So this is the beginning of that chart. So it shows bird risk, both acute toxicity, which is like immediate harm, and chronic toxicity, which is harm that accumulates over time. We also included environmental problems. This actually means soil and water impacts. And this ecotoxicity is the other organisms in our farms that can be harmed. And then human health, because we figured, well, if you don't care about birds, maybe you care about yourself. And I know we all want to care about everything, but it's good to know, it's good to be informed as you make decisions. So some of the pesticides, organic pesticides that are immediately causing harm to birds are copper sulfate and sabadella dust. Some moderately toxic pesticides are this azadirachtin, which is it's a yellow for moderate, copper hydroxide, copper oxide, copper oxychloride, phosphoric acid, potassium bicarbonate, pyrethrin. I know I'm going fast, but you can download this document from our website. And the other thing about pesticides is it's really not a great idea to use broad spectrum pesticides, if at all possible, like pyrethrins, because they are going to kill all your beneficials. And you want to use them really judiciously. You want to scout your crop before you use anything. And products like BT, while they're not harmful to birds, they can be really, they kill moths and butterflies, and those populations are in decline. So, and that gets to this publication, which is not ours. This is Xerces organic pesticide publication that has a whole list of the organic pesticides that harm pollinators. So you can just Google Xerces and organic pesticides and download that really easily. They say to choose non-toxic options and avoid use on blooming plants because that's where the pollinators are going to be. We, a few years ago, put out this publication, Positive Organic Indicators and Red Flags. We wrote it for inspectors, but if I was a farmer, I'd want to look at it too. And so inspectors don't want to spend a lot of time on your farm because time is money for you. And so they need to be able to look at things and know what they're, is this good or not good for biodiversity? So when they see a hedgerow, which is semi-natural area or a natural area, check, that's biodiversity, but also connectivity between habitat. Like, does this connect to a wildway and the general abundance of wildlife, the birds and insects and reptiles and amphibians and other mammals. Other positive indicators is that you have mapped your biodiversity on your farm. If you have a flower strip, put it on your map that you include in your OSP. If you work within RCS or other programs to enhance biodiversity, include that. Some red flags would be if you didn't have any biodiversity, it was just a crop. There's no wildlife. However, wildlife or at least pollinators and beneficial insects are moving through that farm. They don't know what to do. Maybe the beneficial insects are going to hang out for a little while if there's a pest, but really you're not maintaining biodiversity with that situation. Or if you just are killing wildlife, like killing migratory birds, which are federally protected and also not a good thing to do if you're organic. Other red flags are you're not managing your invasive species or you're just degrading or destroying your habitat. Okay, I know I keep telling you about these publications, but they're all on our website. Here's another one, How to Conserve Biodiversity on the Farm, Actions to Take on a Continuum from Simple to Complex. So no matter where you are along in the continuum, you can get started. And it's really just get started and moving through the continuum is the goal you want to set. So simple practices like you're probably already thinking about or doing, which is feeding soil life with compost and cover crops, keeping the soil covered because there's so many good organisms that live in the soil, and the soil itself won't erode away, protecting natural areas, managing inputs carefully. Some intermediate practices, planting diverse cover crops, planting annual flowering plants in between your crop rows, nest boxes, and then planting more permanent vegetation, which will last you for many, many years. What do? We put on field days that are super fun to get together with everybody. We have webinars like the one I described yesterday, and we have a virtual course right now. We're halfway through it about beneficial birds, and it's kind of geared toward Midwest farmers, but anybody can benefit from it. If you're in California, we have 14 continuing education credits that DPR requires. They require that you keep your continuing education units up if you're using pesticides. And we've been told over and over how people really enjoy these credits. So it's 14 hours of credits. We help growers put in conservation plantings often. We have a lot of videos, as I mentioned before, that are short and really valuable. Lots of publications. So the key takeaways, inventory your soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. Identify the positive indicators and the red flags. Then place your farm on the continuum and choose a couple of steps to support biodiversity by providing what they need, what the beneficials need. And then when you support biodiversity, it reduces the need for pesticides. It provides long-term ecological pest management, pollination, and farm resilience, and it helps with biodiversity conservation. And here's my email address. If you want to contact me, Joanne B. at wildfarmalliance.org, and of course, our main website. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for all of that information. Jamie, if you could turn on your video again so we can spotlight you and unmute yourself. Just want to say thank you again to both of you for sharing so much about inputs and biodiversity conservation on farms. We've had a number of questions in the chat box that we have about 8 minutes right now to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll answer more during the office hours. Grace, do you have an input related question for Jamie?
Yeah, I'll just start with one of the first ones that we got around treated lumber. So for Jamie, there's a question if someone has fence posts that are made from treated lumber, does that apply? Does that restriction of using treated lumber for fence posts apply?
I mean, it's basically if it's all new installations, but it just depends on, when they put it in and if they're in the process of certification and all of that. Like if it was a newer one and they didn't know that, and they were in the process of certification, they had just put it in, then they might put a buffer around it. So it just depends. If it was there with the property and it's been there for years, I mean, they don't ask you to dig it out and replace it, but definitely no new installations of treated lumber. And like for tomato stakes and things like that, definitely no treated wood, just regular pine or whatever, or metal stakes.
Thank you. I think that answers the question very clearly.
Okay.
I'll jump in and ask a question for you, Joanne. We have someone, I'll read out the full question, but I think the general idea is sort of two-part. One is how to balance bringing in the good helpful beneficial diversity, and then with the pests that might show up. So that's sort of part of the question. And the other question is about sort of balancing what you're doing with what your neighbors are doing. So here's the question. I may have competing efforts. If I make my property biodiverse, but my neighbor vineyard is using sound and glitter ribbons to limit fruit loss, both being organic pest management practices, it seems that we are in conflict for the purpose of producing the organic product on each of our farms. Where is the balance? So, how do people balance beneficials and pests when they're thinking about biodiversity? And how do you balance what you're doing with what your neighbors are doing?
Yeah, and that was related, this question was related to vineyards, right? Yeah, well, it just so happens there's been some really cool research that's shown up in Napa. Matt Johnson, who's the barn owl guy, is also studying songbirds and found that songbirds are eating this alfalfa three-cornered hopper. They're eating sharpshooters. They're eating mealy bugs and leaf hoppers. And so why wouldn't you want birds? I mean, there are birds that eat the grapes, but they are flocking birds. They are coming in the fall. The birds that you could support in nest boxes that study was all about nest boxes. Those birds are nesting in the spring. They're insectivores. They're not eating your crop. The birds, the flocking birds are the starlings and the blackbirds. And yes, if you're gonna deter them, you only want to deter them right when you need to, or maybe a little bit before the crop is ready. So there's no traction. But then they don't want it. It's not good to have that shimmering flaggery all year long because you're discouraging the good birds. In general, birds, if you have a really sterile kind of farm situation where it's just the crop and dirt and no other diversity, not a big crop mix and not some flowering habitat or other kinds of shrubs and trees, you're going to get the pest birds generally. But when you diversify your farmscape, you diversify the bird community and bring in a whole bunch of those other kinds of birds, the birds that are beneficial. I am generalizing a little bit. There are bird problems along hedgerows sometimes. Sometimes quail live in a hedgerow, and so growers will and maybe rabbits sometimes live in a hedgerow. And so growers don't grow crops right next to the hedgerow like you wouldn't want to put strawberries right next to the hedgerow because the birds will come out a little bit and eat them and go back in. But and rabbits, they're really watching for predators. They won't go deep out into the field. And Rachel Long did a study looking at rodents related to hedgerows. And most rodents that show up in the fields are showing up because they're eating the crop. The crop is what they want. They might be living in the hedgerow, but it's unlikely. We know some situations like that, but it's uncommon. And I think just in general related to pests and pests moving in, and if you have a hedgerow and we like to plant a hedgerow that flowers at throughout the season. Different plants are flowering throughout the season, and so there's always a support of beneficial insects. So the insects are already there, and if some food comes, some pest comes and hangs out there, they're probably gonna be on it and attacking it. So yes, it's not like hedgerows only support beneficials, but they overwhelmingly are beneficials insectaries.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for sharing all that. My understanding too sometimes is you can be careful with your plant selection when designing your hedgerows and edge plantings or other practices, and that might help sort of you pick and choose what to bring onto your farm. I'm going to pass it back to Grace for one more input question before we go into our closing and then open our office hours to chat more about biodiversity and inputs.
Okay, Jamie, I am coming to you. Are DIY ferments allowed in organic certified farms?
Yeah, I saw that in the chat. It just depends on your methods and the ingredients. So, like anything, it would need to be disclosed to your certifier and exactly how what you use and what you do to make that ferment, just like anything else. So, and likely it would be approved. It just depends if there's manure added or what's going on in those how many days to the crop that you apply it and things like that. But it just depends on the ingredients and the method. So if that person wants to contact me on the 11 o'clock hour, we can kind of pick that apart and I can help them figure it out. Sorry, my dog barking.
Great. Thanks so much, Jamie. We are going to now pause the questions for a minute while we go into our closing. Grace, if you could share your screen again. I just want to take a moment to once again really give a big thanks to our experts here today, Joanne and Jamie. If you'd like to learn more about their organizations, you can look them up online, CCOF Foundation and Wild Farm Alliance. I also want to let you know that next week we'll be starting a 3-part series on building soil health in transitioning soils. Next week, we'll start thinking about soil life. We have 2 really excellent speakers lined up for that, so that we hope you'll join us for that session as well. And then, as always, please stay on for office hours with our speakers. They'll be with us until 2 p.m. That concludes the first part of our webinar series.